You talked about the transparency part of the data that you're collecting. Can you say a little more about the credibility of, and particularly farmers and ranchers, but also what consumers think about? You mentioned that we're kind of neutral. In other words, it's not like everybody loves animal agriculture, everybody hates animal
Right.
agriculture. There's still room for debate on that. Who really has trust and credibility according to the research that you from
Oh,
what you've seen?
farmers and ranchers. I mean, without a doubt, head and shoulders, above all other players.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Dayhoff, the Sustainability Director for DSM Firmenich Animal Nutrition North America, and this is our fourth sustainability episode on the Wisenetics family of podcasts. Thanks for joining us today, and I'm very excited to have as my guest Juliana Potts, the President and CEO of the Meat Institute. So welcome, Juliana.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. And so, as I mentioned to you, a lot of the listeners out there are folks that really work in production animal agriculture. That's a big part of the audience of these podcasts. Some of them may be familiar with the Meat Institute and the work that you do, but some of them may not be. So first, before we get started, why don't you tell me or tell the listeners a little bit more about your role and the Meat Institute itself?
Well, I'd be happy to. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to connect with so many folks that are outside of the association work that we do here at the Meat Institute, but are vitally important to the work that we do here at the Meat Institute. So our organization represents the packers and processors of every species of meat and poultry that people enjoy. So we sit in the middle of the supply chain. Our members both slaughter and they're further processors. So they, in fact, the majority by number of companies in our organization do not slaughter. They take the meat and they turn it into delicious sausages, bacon, and other products, that hot dogs and all kinds of things that people enjoy. We have about 330 member companies that are what we call general members. And the general membership is if you have a grant of inspection from the Food Safety Inspection Service at USDA, you qualify as a general member. And that's really important because, as we like to say, other than nuclear energy, we're the most regulated industry in the country. I don't know if that's a little bit of an embellishment, but it feels sometimes that it is.
It'll ring true with this audience, so that's
yes,
good.
Yeah. And so what we do at the Meat Institute for our general members is we provide the kind of education, resources, and advocacy to help them do better in their businesses. And primarily, I think going way back to the beginning of this organization, and it's been in existence in one fashion or another since 1906, bringing together a lot of other organizations under the same banner over the years. But it was to really keep food safe and to provide the kind of help and assistance to ensure that our food safety system in the meat and poultry industry was as sound as it can be. And I think we're really proud of that history. What we also have, and good segue from the food safety aspect, we have about 220 supplier members. So this is where DSM would sit. Folks in the industry who provide services to our members or to allied members who are in food service and retail and other organizations. And so we have those, I think, total probably close to 900 member companies and organizations in the Meat Institute along that sort of ecosystem of meat and poultry processing. It's a really, really great place to be. People, I think, look at what we do, and sometimes with anti-animal agriculture stakeholders or people who want to change the way we do things on the farm, it feels a lot of times like we're kind of under attack and a bit beleaguered. And so from where I sit, it's such a positive outlook and such a positive place to be because people love our products, and they really need and want to know that the way they are coming to them, the ethics of animal production, the environmental sustainability pieces, that those are all good and improving. And then they want to enjoy their bacon, or their chicken nuggets. And so that's really,
this Thanksgiving's coming up, so it'll be
their
to
Thanksgiving
the
turkey.
too, right? That's right.
That's right. And we're for every species. We are for all the animals.
Sure.
Because and we I think have a large number of multi species production companies. So either people who are further processors and making chicken, turkey, and pork sausages, or slaughtering all of those for fresh meat as well. I think we even have members that process buffalo. So so everything. And David, if you don't mind, one other thing I'll say about the Meat Institute that your listeners may not realize is we do kind of act as an umbrella a little bit for several organizations that either kind of sit with us in the office and have separate boards, but also are related in terms of their joint membership. So Meat Importers Council of America, the Leather and Hide Council of America, U.S. Poultry and Egg Roundtable is here for space, but synergies all over the place with the sustainability work that we're doing. We also have our Meat Foundation, which provides research, education, and scholarships for our industry. So lots of synergies and lots of organizations kind of housed and working together on behalf of the meat industry.
Fumonisins are one of the most prevalent mycotoxins in North America and can impact the performance of your feed and pigs. The CFIA recently approved MycoFix Fumezyme from DSM Firmenich to help swine producers combat fumonisins in their swine feed. Protect your pigs and fumonisins at MycoFix with Fumezyme. Learn more at dsm.com/MycoFix.
Oh, well, thanks. And that was a really helpful introduction and also sets up well. I mean, you've already said the magic word sustainability a couple of times, but it was interesting to know. I confess I didn't realize that the original starting point was more around the food safety aspect of it, obviously looking at the regulation overall. And now, sustainability is part of the things that you guys work on too. So can you tell a little more about why you guys have invested in doing a lot more work around sustainability?
Yes. It's a wonderful story, and I will tell it, I hope, a little bit like an interesting evolution and narrative, because it really does have a very recent history with the organization, but we have spent a lot of time thinking through how we need to help our industry position itself with respect to these issues. So 2018, which seems like 100 years ago now, given the pandemic, but it really wasn't that long ago. And it was right before I joined the Meat Institute. So I started in September of 2018. And that summer, there was a very important board meeting where the sort of existential questions about how consumers were feeling about the way the meat industry was transparent or not, was sustainable or not, was ethical with animals or not. That all came up, and there were leaders in the organization at the board level who said, we need to stop defending and deflecting everything that comes at us and putting our heads down and saying, okay, I'm doing good work, just leave me alone. We need to really look at what consumers and our customers are asking of us, and we need to embrace and change. And that became sort of the rallying cry for when I started as a new CEO. Here's your mandate, go forth and figure out how we are going to do this, and not lead in an area where other organizations had already been for a dozen years, but really kind of find our route and our place. We started with almost interchangeably talking about sustainability and trust with consumers. So trust in animal protein was the watchwords. And what developed out of that, and all member-led, very, very proud of this, members of our board and their designees who were working in sustainability, deciding, this is the vision, these are our bold goals, and what for the meat and poultry industry really constitutes the full gamut of sustainability. So what we ended up with is a vision, a strategy called Protein Pact, PACT, for people, animals, and the climate of tomorrow. It has its own sort of branding, but it is not a separate organization. It is something that we created in conjunction with others in the industry and continue to build on the idea that it is an animal protein trust building initiative that goes beyond the meat processors. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it is about 4 or 5 years old in its infancy in terms of the kind of work, long-term work that we need to do to ensure that we are improving. But I'll say it one more time. Protein Pact, it's a framework for continuous improvement in the industry to earn consumer trust. That's about as few words as I've ever been able to kind of explain what it is.
Well, hey, we're on a podcast, so it's good to get the words in there. So speaking of which, and I think that's one of the reasons that I was interested in talking to you in particular, is this consumer part that is built into what you're doing. So, I get a lot of times questions from people that I meet in the course of my work or in the industry overall that boil down to one way or another being all this stuff about sustainability efforts and welfare and things. Like, is this just corporate PR fluff of some sort? Why? Like, do consumers really care about this? And I know you all have been doing some research related to consumers. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the research you've done and address more of that question about not just do consumers care, yes or no, but how and why?
Yeah, absolutely. I will start to answer that question with kind of I mentioned sort of the comprehensive way that we look at it. So sustainability for us, and I'm getting to the consumer part, because it's the consumers who care about these issues kind of in tandem. Certainly food safety is part of it. Animal welfare, you already mentioned. Environment, of course, which has largely become, the climate conversation. Nutrition and health, a big issue for consumers when they make choices in the grocery store or at restaurants. And then workers, so human rights and labor. So all 5 of those are focus areas where we have conducted research with consumers that we, started a baseline several years ago. And it's about perceptions, when we're talking about moving the trust needle, it's how are consumers reacting to many of these concerns. And what we have found is it's pretty neutral. In other words, there's room for us in each of these areas to get on the consumer's radar that producers, certainly who already have a great deal of trust, and processors and everyone in the chain is doing a good job. So I'll use some numbers, but some very small numbers. In each of the 5 areas, our research firm, on a scale of 1 to 5, in each of those 5 areas, we fall somewhere between a 3.4 and a 3.7. Okay. Right? Which is not awful. It's not like, it's not like you were reading in Civil Eats or the New York Times all the time about how terrible meat is for you and how bad the people are. It really is pretty neutral. And so what we have asked our research firm to help us with is tell us what it would take to get to what it would do for the industry to get to a 4 out of 5. And they calculated for us as an industry $17 billion a year in greater, sales volume if we can improve the trust to a 4 out of 5. Where we sit now is impacted greatly by whatever's in the news. Mm-hmm. So that is one of the areas where we're doing some work, is just trying to figure out how we break out of that up and down with the news cycle, depending on what we're doing. And that just requires more focused communications efforts, which we do in conjunction with the research that we do. But to answer your question, we also have, every spring we introduce a retail survey called the Power of Meat.
Okay.
And that Power of Meat survey discloses every year that what people say and what they actually buy can sometimes be very, very different. And that still, with meat and poultry products, sustainability falls much farther down the list than taste, mm-hmm. and in this era of hyperinflation, price. And I would consider those part of value, so and accessibility and convenience. Environment and animal welfare in a time of great inflation have fallen farther and farther down that list. Which is not to say that that's not incredibly important for our customers. So I make a distinction now between those companies that are buying our products,
sure,
and those guests at a restaurant who are buying the products from the customer. Our customers are consistent in saying, we need to know what your plans are for reducing emissions, for maintaining a good animal welfare culture, and we want to see the data. We want to know that it is either reported accurately and third-party verified, and that you have made a commitment to doing better each year. And that's where Protein Pact really comes in. We began, this was our 4th year to collect data from our members, and in 100 different metrics, which sounds awful. But in those 5 areas where, what does your worker safety program look like? Do you have a community effort to donate product? Mm-hmm. Are you, do you maintain, good food safety policies, good employment policies? And so it's almost like a roadmap for excellence for a member company. And then we had 84 member companies providing input into this. So we have this massive amount of data, almost like a great big sustainability report for the industry, that we now have as a way to go into policymakers, have our members talk to their customers about what it is the industry is doing to improve.
So there's a lot there, just to dig in on a couple parts of that. But thank you. It's good stuff. I don't know if you have the numbers off the top of your head or not. I assume there's also logic in there. Let me back up. Consumers, you've done research on it. You've been measuring it some over time, that things like sustainability or parts of sustainability are on the list, but they're not the top of the list. Price, taste, those things. And maybe they're even a little less relevant than they were when in the initial time you did your research. That said, within the chain, that's the consumer part, but the customer part or the people, let's say retailers, food service, processor people, are still consistent in their interest in wanting to be more transparent and have more data available about sustainability. And I'm assuming you talked about the upside of getting to a 4. There's probably a downside of falling to a 3 or below a 3. Is that also part of what your research shows, and what is kind of driving this consistent focus?
The same calculation for doing nothing. So continuing to lose market share because the messaging, the conventional wisdom growing on the other side is, meat, especially beef, is bad for the planet. Animal welfare is still an issue. All of those things was a $13 billion per year drop, over time as these things continue to take hold. So, yeah, big swing there. If we can, and this is part of making the case to the industry that across all of the different sectors, we have to be speaking in unison about the importance, particularly of our emissions profile. Mm-hmm. And, this is where a product like Bovaer comes in, right? It is an opportunity for us to say collectively as an industry, we're not all sitting still.
Right.
We've got technologies that are either online or coming online that are going to help address this so we can all continue to enjoy what we enjoy. On the Power of Meat survey with retailers, one of the percentages I like to use of shoppers, still 98% of people coming into the store put animal protein in the market basket, right? You can't get 98% of people to agree on much. That said, there are a lot of people that describe themselves as vegetarian or vegan or now flexitarian. But those numbers have maintained, a pretty steady level. We don't see vegan, vegetarian, kind of as a label, as I'm calling myself that, more than about 6 or 7%. And that has been really, really consistent. If you look at the mainstream media and a lot of what you see online, you would think that number would be a whole lot greater. So part of what we're trying to do with Protein Pact is take that wonderful data to provide credibility to what we're saying, and collectively with the pork producers and the cattlemen and the poultry producers and poultry companies, with our animal health partners, with soy and corn and our export group, and collectively go in to maybe some unfriendly territory. Let me mention one recent one was Climate Week. And so one of my colleagues spared me the opportunity to go and sit on a panel in front of an audience of people that believe, the animal agriculture industry is killing the planet, and really making the case for why animal agriculture is part of the solution. And it is our partners and suppliers in the animal health industry and feed that are creating these ways for us to reduce our emissions, starting with the animal itself.
I think within this notion of, and I've seen some of the data too about, what's the percentage of people that actually are going to continue, both households that have meat, the people that will still consume meat. And I sometimes find myself making the argument that, setting aside any of the debate on the specific impacts of the different proteins are part of the supply chain, people are going to eat meat, and they still are going to, for whether you like it or not, they're going to. And that we ought to focus on the kinds of benefits that I think the industry is aware need to be made. Like you said, not sitting still, not head in the stand that, there's nothing to see here, there's no problem here. But that we do need to, there are in fact ways to improve the environmental and other forms of sustainability impact of animal proteins, and that the whole planet's going to get as much of an ROI, if not more, on helping that happen, as opposed to trying to make people vegan. I'm exaggerating a little bit. I mean, some people have that message. A lot of people don't, And so I think that there is that kind of message that is inherent in, I think, what you're saying, that the animal protein industry is trying to make progress. And you've talked about the transparency part of the data that you're collecting. Can you say a little more about the credibility of, and particularly farmers and ranchers, but also what consumers think about. You mentioned that we're kind of neutral. In other words, it's not like everybody loves animal agriculture, everybody hates animal agriculture. Right. There's still room for debate on that. Who really has trust and credibility according to the research that from what you've seen?
Farmers and ranchers. I mean, without a doubt, head and shoulders, above all other players. Restaurants continue to have a great deal of credibility, and grocery stores as well. Although in an inflationary environment, we've seen those numbers, come down a little bit. The companies themselves don't do so badly, but it is by far and away the messages coming from production agriculture are the most credible with consumers. I think you see a lot in the vocabulary that people use about factory farms and things like that try to take the farmer rancher out of the equation. So I would be remiss if I did not point to the collaboration that we have with producer groups in what we're doing with Protein Pact. We can't talk validly about Scope 3 emissions sitting in the plant. We have suppliers who are our Scope 3, and to effectively make a difference, to effectively put the data together to say to the downstream customer, this is what we're doing. We've collaborated with the National Pork Board, with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, for the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, which, all of these groups have created their own frameworks and their own targets. And we can be, and in fact are in the process of becoming, the data collection point for the producers that are putting their efforts into those frameworks. So if you have a target as an industry to reduce emissions by a certain percentage by a certain date, we're in the position of being able to work together on that, and then provide that full story of Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions all the way back to the grains, as we begin. Now, this is a bit like moving the Titanic, right? When you think about how many hundreds of thousands of producers we have out there doing the very, very wonderful work that they do, it's a lot. But I do feel that there is this momentum around companies that are supporting and developing the technology through R&D to help, whether it's on corn and soy, all milling, every stage of the process. And I'm really grateful that I have relationships across all of the CEOs of these other organizations that we talk about this all the time. We get our officers together, and we're doing the same thing with the customers now. If you don't mind, I'd like to pivot on one thing that you brought up. Sure. that created the what I'd like to pass along about some of the customer conversations that we've been having.
Please.
It was very, very important, I think, for the audience to know. And back to your consumer question, your actual people eating a McDonald's hamburger or buying meat at Costco. They're not the ones asking for the environmental footprint, right? It's the investors in the public companies, and it's the commitments that the public companies might have made several years ago about being at a certain place, by 2025. And their brands are connected with their commitments, and they are not yet sure how they are going to meet these commitments. So we've had a lot of conversation with the customer group, trying to sort out how can we sort of help close the gap on their understanding of what the industry is doing to improve, and more importantly, the speed with which that's going to happen. Because simply saying, we're going to have, a 50% reduction in emissions in our supply chain by 2030, and not consulting the supply chain is really, we've seen that fail over and over again. So with Protein Pact as a kind of encompassing conversation, we're beginning to bring in some of those consumer concerns through and customer concerns through our platform. And that is really exciting because they're really hungry for working together for everybody to get better, which is exactly what we're trying to do.
Great. Got it. Well, and to that end, with the time we have left, you mentioned some about the connection, that conversation, and the trust that comes from the farmers and ranchers. That was something you brought up a little bit before, the people that had the most trust. If there, a lot of the people listening to this podcast are people that are their daily job is to care for the health and the nutrition of animals and make the feed that they eat, et cetera. Are there any other kind of messages or things that you would like to say to those folks about how what they do impacts what you all are trying to do?
Absolutely. The biggest challenge I think we have is just coordinating all the wonderful information, that we have. We are so much stronger when we work together. We are so much stronger across all the proteins, all sizes of operations, all the organizations. This isn't traditional advocacy. This is, if it were advocacy, it would be, a PR campaign. And that is not what it is. It is actual work being done and getting credit for it. I think where we realized, there were two sort of aspects to our companies wanting to get a program and help from us about how can they begin to inventory their emissions, how can they put a sustainability plan together. Very, very basic stuff that comes from. When I do this, I not only want to know how to measure and how to reduce or whatever it is, how to get better on food waste, how to get better on energy consumption, but also I want credit for it. I want to be able to go out into the consuming public and say, I am so proud of what we are doing on the farm, in transit, at the processor, and on down the line. So those collaborations, I would just encourage you to be, as a member of an organization, that is in that chain, keep pressing on the other members, peer members, and your leadership to just bring it all together, because that's really where I think a lot of the opponents want to divide us. And obviously there is competition among the proteins for, shelf space and brain space. But in the end, it's really, for us, it's about saying to the consumer, you can, whatever it is, cheese, eggs, chicken nuggets, hot dogs, you can trust that it was done in an ethical, sustainable way. And that's where that messaging is so important for us to be sort of collaborative on. So that's what I would leave you with.
Well, great. Well, that's a great message to leave it with. So once again, Juliana Potts, the president and CEO of the Meat Institute, thanks for being my guest here on this podcast today.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it very much.
All right. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. If this may broadcast after Thanksgiving, but for everybody listening, happy Thanksgiving out there too.
Same to you. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.